at our feet. Moses mantle-handed dust and heat.
Every so often, the biblical story throws you a curveball, so sharp it forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew about who God chooses and why. Joshua 2 is one of those moments. A foreigner, a woman, a prostitute. And yet she sees the truth before the covenant people do. She acts with more courage, more clarity, more faith than the men sent to evaluate her city. And history bends around her decision. And that's the chapter we're stepping into today. Welcome to Come Listen With Me. My name is Ricky Black, aka Elder Eleazar, and today is our Tuesday, May 19th reading of Joshua chapter 2 in our ongoing 2026 Come Follow Me study of the Old Testament. Now, this is day 2 of week 21, Be Strong and of a Good Courage, and the chapter where the conquest of Canaan begins, not with a sword, but with a confession of faith from inside the city that Israel is about to bring down. Now, before we read, I do want to acknowledge our Heavenly Father and give Him thanks for all that we received today. Because today's chapter is one of the strongest evidences in the Old Testament that the gospel was never meant to stay inside the covenant boundaries of Israel. A Canaanite woman, an outsider by every measure of her culture would have used to draw the line. She hears the God of Israel from a distance and chooses Him. And the scarlet cord she hangs in her window is, in every meaningful sense, a foreshadowing of the blood of Christ, who will 3 millennia later open the door to all of us who started outside the camp. So let us have eyes to see Christ hidden in the chapter and have the humility to recognize that the same mercy that found Rahab finds us. So let us commit to read, to seek, and to pray, and to learn, all in the name of Jesus Christ. With that, let's come read together. Now, when you open a text like this, you're not just scanning the words on the page. You're confronting a story that wants something from you. And if you read passively, half awake, just box checking, you're going to miss the transformation it's trying to provoke. So today, as we step into Joshua chapter 2, don't drift. Aim your attention. Discipline it. Here are a few questions and thoughts to help you read with intention, so the chapter can actually shape the way that you think. First, Rahab's confession of faith. You'll notice something remarkable in Rahab's words. She isn't guessing, she isn't speculating. She speaks with a kind of hard historical clarity, as if she's been paying attention to the movements of God long before these spies ever arrived. So, as you read, ask yourself, what does she know? And more importantly, how could she possibly know it? Because that tells you something about the reach of Israel's story and the reach of the truth itself. Then, who is the active agent, the spies or Rahab? Watch the flow of the action in this chapter. Track it carefully. You'll see the spies moving, hiding, reacting, almost scrambling. And then there's Rahab, who seems to step into the narrative with a kind of decisive competence. So the real question becomes, who's actually driving this story? The men who were sent, or the women that they were sent to observe? The tension reveals something profound about agency, courage, and calling. Finally, later in the chapter, Rahab receives a set of instructions, precise, symbolic, and almost ritualistic. At the center of it all is this scarlet cord. So pay attention to that. Let your mind trace the pattern as we read through it. Because if you've been reading the Old Testament with any seriousness, that color, that sign, that whole act, it should stir a lot of memories of things earlier and something foundational. So follow that thread. It's not an accident. So as we step into this chapter, don't treat it like a passive reading exercise. Treat it like an encounter with a story that's older than you and wiser than you and demanding something of you. Right? And to keep your attention sharp, to keep you from drifting into something that's comfortable, like an unconscious mode where nothing changes, I want you to hold a few things in mind, not as trivia, but as lenses, as your tools that discipline your perception. Because if you aim your attention properly, Joshua chapter 2, it stops being a children's story about spies and a courageous woman. And it will become a study in knowledge, agency, and the strange ways God works through very unlikely people. So let's open our scriptures together to Joshua chapter 2. And we are going to begin with verses 1 through 7. And Joshua the son of Nun sent out to Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country. And the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, There came men unto me, but I wist not whence there were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and had hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them to the way to the Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate. Okay, so Joshua's camped in Shittim, right on the edge of the promised land, right? Staring across the Jordan at Jericho. And he sends 2 men to scout the land. Now, the Hebrews call them meraglim, right? It's the same word that's used for the 12 scouts in Numbers 13, and it's not an accident. So the text, it's deliberately invoking the memory of that earlier catastrophe. See, back then, 10 of the 12 came back terrified. Giants, fortified cities, military impossibility, and they folded. And they refused the gift. And God even said, fine, then wander in the desert for 40 years. So when Joshua sends 2 this time, the number is symbolic, and it's very restrained and intentional, right? First off, it reflects the fact that there were the 2 who saw God and what God could do with them of those original 12, right? So there were the 2 that said, no, we got this, let's go do it. So it's reflecting that. But also, in terms of the Israelites, it's also legally sufficient, because in Israelite law, 2 witnesses establish a testimony. So Joshua isn't mounting a military operation, he's sending a witness party. He's saying, we're going to see the truth clearly this time. So they enter Jericho, they stay at the house of a zonah, right, which is Rahab. The Hebrew, it gets actually really blunt here. See, later interpreters, they try to soften this, and they call her an innkeeper or a hostess, saying anything but what it plainly actually says. But the Septuagint, it doesn't flinch. It actually calls her a porne, right, a prostitute. Now, the narrator doesn't apologize for her, and he doesn't try and sanitize her, right? He drops the most socially disreputable label possible on the woman who is about to become the theological center of the chapter. That is a pattern in Scripture, too, because God keeps choosing people that the world writes off. So Jericho, by the way, it also wasn't a large metropolis. Like, the archaeology suggests a population in the low thousands. So 2 foremen walking in would have been almost noticed immediately, because you know everybody that lives there, and those guys are not from here. So the king's officers, they come straight to Rahab's door with a demand. Bring out the men. And here's where the story tightens up a bit. See, Rahab acts with astonishing decisiveness. First, she hides them, and the text notes that she had already done so before the officers even arrived. So she was committed before she was confronted. And second, she lies, directly and boldly. Third, she sends the officers chasing shadows towards the Jordan fords. And when the gate closes behind them, the spies are still on her roof. Now, the ethical tension lands right here. She lies, she deceives the civil authority, she aids the enemy of her own city, and yet the biblical tradition praises her. In Hebrews chapter 11, it puts her in the hall of faith. James chapter 2 uses her as the example of faith expressed in action, and neither text tries to resolve the lie. So the moral tradition, it wrestles with it. Now, Augustine says, yes, she sinned, but her faith outweighed it, so it was okay. And Aquinas argues that the deception was completely justified, like lying to murderers to protect innocent life. Modern Jewish readings see her as a righteous, paralleling the Hebrew midwives in Exodus chapter 1 who deceived Pharaoh and were blessed for it. And the Latter-day Saint thoughts, they tend to hold the complexity, on both sides without forcing a neat resolution. So, because sometimes the Spirit prompts unusual acts in unusual circumstances, and that's okay. It's God's prerogative. But what's unmistakable is this. The narrative voice, it refuses to clean things up, right? It refuses to make something of Rahab that she's not. She is who she is, and God meets her where she is and uses her how he can and will. And one more detail. This is easy to miss. In verse 6, she hid the men under stalks of flax up on the roof. It's pishtai hayetz, right? So there are flax stalks that are drying in the sun. Now, that only happens in late March and early April in the Jordan Valley. That's Passover season. And the Jordan, as we'll see tomorrow, was at its flood stage. So the text it's time-stamping the moment for us. And that timestamp is actually really important, and we're going to want to pay attention to it going forward. So let's continue in verses 8 through 14. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the kings of the Amorites, that were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man, because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in the earth beneath. Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, and that ye will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the man answered her, Our life for yours, if ye utter not this business. And it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. So, this chapter, it really is the centerpiece here, right? It's the turning point. And it's Rahab, not the spies, who take the narrative by the throat here, right? She speaks the longest uninterrupted speech in the entire story. And it's one of the longest first-person confessions of Israel's God from a Gentile anywhere in the Old Testament. And she structures it with precision. It has 3 claims, each one escalating. First claim, chapter 9. I know that the Lord has given you the land. So the Hebrew verb is yarati, right? I know. Not I think, not I've heard rumors. Like, this is the same word God uses when he says, I know my sheep. It's a settled conviction of absolute knowledge. She's not guessing. She acknowledges the reality. She's already internalized it and accepted it as an movable, unchangeable truth. Second claim, verses 9 through 10. She says the terror of Israel has fallen on Canaan because of what God did at the Red Sea and what he did at Sihon and Og. And the language that she uses, nafal alanu amaktahim, right? Your terror has fallen upon us. That mirrors the vocabulary of Exodus chapter 15 in the Song of the Sea. Fear and dread shall fall upon them until your people pass over, O Lord. So now, she may never have heard the song of Moses sung in the camp of Israelites, but information moved fast in the ancient Near East, like faster than you probably imagine for what we'd consider primitive culture, right? And she's speaking in a theological grammar of Israel's own foundational hymn. And she names specific events. The Red Sea crossing 40 years earlier, the defeat of Sihon and Og within the last year. So she has a historical memory and current intelligence, right? So Jericho has been watching. They've been paying attention. They know what's happening. And the third claim is verse 11. And it's an important line. For the Lord, your God, he is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. So it's the exact phrasing, right? Yahweh Elohechem hu Elohim, Bashamayim mi Ma'el Va'el, Haaretz mi Tachat. It's the same confession that Moses gave Israel back in Deuteronomy 4, verses 39. Know this day, the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is none else. So a Canaanite prostitute is speaking the monotheistic creed of Israel. And she may not know she's quoting Deuteronomy, but she is making some theological claims that Moses made to the covenant people a generation earlier. These are things that would be known to the spies. So this is not a woman swept in a moment of emotion. She settled the biggest question available to her, who is God, and she acted accordingly. And then she negotiates in verses 12 and 13 and invokes the word chesed, right? Covenant loyalty, steadfast love, the central relational virtue of the Old Testament. Since I have shown you chesed, show chesed to my father's house. So notice the shape of her request. She asks not for herself first, but for her entire house, father, mother, brothers, sisters, everybody under that roof. It mirrors the shape of the Passover in Exodus chapter 12. So the mark on the door protects everyone inside the door. And the spies respond with the strongest oath formula they have. Our life for yours. So they pledge their own deaths as her family falls under their watch. Now the covenant is sealed. What happens to you happens to us. Let's continue. 22 to 24. 15 to 18. So she let them down by a cord through the window, for her house upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon that wall. And she said unto them, Get ye to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourself there 3 days until the pursuers returned. We're going to continue here in verses 15 through 20. So we're going to continue here in verses 15 through 21. Then she let down a cord through the window for her house upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. And she said unto them, Get ye to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourself there 3 days until the pursuers be returned. Afterward ye may go your way. And the men said unto her, We will be blameless of this thine oath which thou hast made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by. And thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy household home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thy house in the street, his blood shall be upon his head. And we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house of blood, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if thou utter this our business, then we will be quit of thine oath which thou hast made us swear to. And she said, According unto my words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet line in the window. And they went and came unto the mountain, and abode there 3 days, until the pursuers were returned, and the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. So the 2 men returned, and descended from the mountain, and passed over, and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and told him all the things that befell them. And they said unto Joshua, Truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. So the spies, they hide in the hill for 3 days. The search parties give up, and when the men finally return to Joshua, they report, This is exactly what we needed to hear. Truly the Lord has delivered us, the land into our hands, for the inhabitants melt before us. Now, that line is an inversion of Numbers chapter 13. See, back then the spies came back talking about giants and fortified cities and Israel's inadequacy, right? The 10 said, we can't, and the 2, Joshua and Caleb, said, yeah, we can. So 40 years later, Joshua sends 2 new witnesses, and this time the report aligns with faith, not with fear. The cycle began at Kadesh Barnea. It closes here at Shittim. But if you notice something deeper, the intelligence they bring back is not tactical, and it's not troop counts or wall measurements or supply lines. It's just the theological. They quote Rahab. They repeat her language. The core of their report is a Canaanite woman's confession of faith. And that tells you the real value of Joshua chapter 2. It's not reconnaissance, it's revelation. The Lord's already gone ahead of Israel. Jericho is psychologically broken before a single trumpet can sound. And inside the walls, at least one household has already crossed the only boundary that truly matters, the confession that the Lord is God. So that's all of our reading today. But let me pull back and synthesize what we just read, right? So this chapter is structurally strange. The narrator pauses the entire conquest narrative to give us a private conversation in a brothel. Why? Because the chapter is doing 2 pieces of theological work that the rest of the book will depend upon. The first is it complicates any simplistic, totalizing reading of harem, right? Devoted to destruction. So before a single city falls, the narrator shows us that harem is not absolute. See, anyone in Canaan who turns to the Lord lives. And the principle is baked into the conquest from the first city onward. We'll see it again with the Gibeonites in chapter 9. The second is that Rahab is deliberately positioned as the narrative counterpoint to Achan in chapter 7. It's an intentional symmetry. Rahab is a Canaanite who confesses, she lives. Achan is an Israelite who conceals, he dies. So the line in Joshua, it's not ethnic at all. It's 100% covenantal. The narrator wants the contrast to really just burn into your mind. So he gives Rahab the longest theological speech in the book. And there are a couple of points we're drawing out too. First is that there's Gentile inclusion here. The Abrahamic promise, in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. It's been mostly latent through the Pentateuch, right? But Joshua chapter 2 is one of the first moments where it becomes like operational. It's functioning. A Canaanite, the very category the conquest is supposed to remove, is folded into the covenantal family. Now, 3 generations later, her descendant is David. So 42 generations later, Jesus. We're going to see that pattern repeat also in the Book of Mormon, right? Helaman chapter 5 reads like Rahab on the national scale. Outsiders confess, outsiders are folded in. 2 Nephi 30 verse 2 states the principle outright. As many as the Gentiles as will repent are the covenant people of the Lord. So the boundary that the conquest seems to draw was never really a boundary, right? And the next point is the scarlet cord. Now, Origen and Cyprian, they both read it as Christ's blood. And even in LDS typology, it runs in that same direction, right? The cord, the Passover blood, the high priest scarlet thread, the sacrificial blood on the altar, all of them point towards the moment when the actual blood of the actual lamb is applied to the doorposts of every house that will receive it. So Rahab hangs the sign before the deliverance arrives. That's the order that most of us live in, right? And the last point here is that the structure is of chesed. Rahab doesn't negotiate from any position of power or privilege. She's got none of that. She negotiates just from prior loyalty. I have shown you chesed. Now show chesed to my father's house. So the reciprocity is the shape of covenant life. We act in loyalty towards God and his people. And the blessings that follow, they're not wages. It's nothing earned. It's just the covenantal return that happens in that environment. Now, a couple of things to think about through the week, too. First, the boundary you think excludes you is rarely the real boundary. Rahab fit every category the conquest was about to judge: nationality, ethnicity, profession, geography. But the actual line that God was drawing wasn't ethnic or national, it was confessional. She was inside the only boundary that mattered before she ever met an Israelite. Most of us at some point will be tempted to believe we're outside the reach of God's mercy. But this chapter says, no, we're not. And the next thing is that the sign goes up before the salvation arrives. So Rahab hung the cord the day the spies left, not the day the army showed up. So she lived under the visible commitment for days or weeks before deliverance came. Her neighbors could see it. So faith works like that. You hang the cord before the horizon shows any sign of rescue. And here's something for the comments today. Rahab shows up 4 times in the New Testament: Matthew's genealogy, Hebrews chapter 11, James chapter 2, and implicitly in the Ruth narrative through Boaz. She gets serious treatment in the Talmud. The early Christian writers, they loved her, right? She's everywhere. And yet most of us grew up remembering her mainly for the scarlet cord, not for the theological confession that came first. So here's your question. What changes for you when you read Rahab as a theologian first and a rescued woman second? Drop your thoughts below. Love to hear what you think about that. And today on Substack, it's going to go out live. It's going to be a deep dive article, Rahab the Canaanite, Gentle Inclusion and the Scarlet Cord. We're going to go deeper in her confession, the rabbinic tradition linking her to David, the patristic readings of the Scarlet Cord, and the full chesed structure of the negotiation. So the links are going to be in the description and pinned in the comments. Check it out. And again, add to the comments. Tell me what you think. Tomorrow, day 3, we're going to read Joshua chapters 3 and 4, the crossing of the Jordan. The ark goes first. The priests stand mid-river. The water backs up at Adam, and 12 stones rise before the riverbed as a witness for the children who will one day ask, what do these stones mean? The second Exodus. And again, this week's song is Be Strong and of a Good Courage. It's all up on YouTube, and you get the MP3 download. The Rahab verse, the Scarlet Cord verse, it's in there. So it's worth your time. And listen, again, links are in the description. Go ahead and grab them. And that's all I have for you today. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. And until then, as always, I appreciate you all and thank you for choosing to spend some of your precious time to come listen with me.
Good courage, lift that sword, as for me